What I had for today was we're going to talk a little bit about faith. It says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I know it's a little hard to comprehend, but um, you hear people talking about when things are good. Well, I knew things would turn out. If I just had faith. You'll hear people recommend it when they're not sure what to say. Oh, I'm so sorry you're going through a rough time. Just have faith. And when others seem unfazed by life's obstacles, they might tell you it's because they have faith. So, what do they mean? You know, Hebrews 11:1. This is another rendition of it. Defines faith as confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. So faith is the result of believing the gospel, which, we've already done that. The good news that Jesus died for our sin, made a way for us to be right with God and spend eternity in heaven. When we allow the reality of the gospel to affect every part of our lives, it changes the way we think and changes how we behave. You have faith of an assurance that you are going to heaven. You have that faith that you will see. Oh, good heavens! It's not Peggy. What's her name? Anyways, you have faith that we're going to heaven, but there's three ways that faith changes our life. One, faith in God gives you strength. When I say strength, I don't mean physical strength to fight bullies. I mean inner resolve to withstand turmoil. Faith gives you strength, the inner resolve to withstand anything that you're going through. It's the hope of knowing that God's going to see you through. The writer of Psalms 138, and most likely it was probably David, he says of God, in the day when I cried out, you answered me and made me bold with strength in my soul. So when we are right with God, we never go into turmoil alone. We have the creator of the universe on our side. And for example, take David, the story of how he killed Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17. At that time, David was a shepherd boy. They estimate he was probably 16, 17 at the time. He was not a warrior, but when he saw Goliath mocking God's people, David approached the king and asked to go down and fight. Picture the babysitter next door or the kid who delivers your paper telling the president, let me handle this one. But David's ability to not be shaken by Goliath's size or insults was a result of David's faith in God. David tells the king, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. David had faith that God would defeat the giant and deliver his people. So David stood up to the king and then to the giant. Faith, faith depends on what you have faith in. We put our faith in the God of the universe, and we know that he keeps his word and that he's always there. And our faith is built upon experience. When you put your faith in God in something on the evidence of things that you don't see at the moment, but you put your faith in God that he's going to see you through, and then when he sees you through, and you look back and think, okay, wow, okay, that God was there. He did help me. He did give me the strength to go through it. That is banking faith. It's just like, for instance, my sister. Oh, my word, she called me at work. She was crying her eyes out, and she's 33, 34, and having a baby. Early in her pregnancy, and she's having all kinds of trouble with this one. And which all the details, I have no idea what it is. And so I told her, I said, sis, this is where rubber meets the road when it comes to our faith. I said, now is the time where you put your faith into action and say, God, I know, I believe that you're gonna work this out, and you're gonna make sure the baby's completely normal, that everything's gonna be just fine. I said, sis, this is a spiritual warfare. The devil is fighting you, trying to say something's wrong with your baby's going to die, or whatever's going to happen. I said, the devil's attacking you right where you're the weakest. And I said, but you can't listen to him because he's wrong. I said, what I recommend is you Google the promises of God, and it'll give you a list of scripture right there that you can read and stand on and believe in. I said, sis, God's got this. He will take care of you. He is our good shepherd, and he promised that he would. And so the next day was her appointment, and she texted me, and this is what she said. And it was amazing how God worked it all out, which I knew God would. But she says this: ultrasound was good, my cervix looks good. She said the placenta looked great, nothing that would cause concern. The doctor's office did not send my last ultrasound over, but praise the Lord, everything looked okay. She also told me at the beginning that she had a similar experience as mine with her second baby, and everything turned out absolutely normal. Knowing that she understood felt like such a relief. And see, God has a way of calming our fears in the midst of uncertainty. And he calmed Ashley's fears. And I prayed that moment in Ashley's life would be a life-defining moment in her faith, where she can look back on that and say, God worked his hand in this. And that's what faith does. That will be a defining moment in her walk, where if something else happens ahead, she can look back on that situation and say, no, God's going to help me in this situation because God was there in this situation. And why experience and exercising our faith and trusting in God when it doesn't look like there's any way out, there's no way we can get through it, but God sees us through, and experience is built up and strengthens our faith. But faith in God gives you courage. Courage and strength aren't the same things, even though they're often seen together. Courage is the ability to do what scares us, to act on our beliefs despite threats of danger, to show strength in the face of grief or pain. Courage, like strength, comes directly from our faith in God. Our confidence that heaven is real will directly affect the risk we're willing to take. If death is the worst thing that can happen to someone, how do you hurt the person who believes there is a better life waiting after this one? Esther is I'm being reminded of faith in giving you courage. And God brought this scripture to my mind. And I'll read it. It's in 1 Kings 18. And this is amazing. Okay. Elijah had such a faith in God that he said this. At the time, King Ahab was the wickedest king ever in the history of Israel. And his wife Jezebel was a foreigner, and she just pushed him on to do more evil. But she had like total of 850 false prophets. They worshiped Baal, which is a false god, and are provoking God to anger by their lack of and Elijah felt like he was the only one, felt like he was alone in the midst of this sinful idolatry, all of Israel turning their back on God, that he was the only one that didn't bow his knee to Baal. But God later told Elijah that he said 7,000 have not bowed their knee to Baal. So you're not the only one. But I mean, that's just like a very small number compared to all of Israel that was actually going by the wayside. But this is the faith that Elijah put in God. He says, okay, Elijah came to all the people and said, how long will you falter between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. But the people answered him not a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are four. It says here 450 men, but there was 400 others as well. Therefore, let them give us 2 bulls. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it in pieces, lay it on wood, but put no fire under it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, put no fire under it. Then you call on the name of your gods, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God. So all the people said, it is well spoken. Now Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose 1 bull for yourselves, and they prepared it. They called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, Baal, hear us. But there was no voice, no one answered. Then they leaped about the altar that they had made. So it was noon. Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry louder, for he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he is busy, or he's on a journey. Perhaps he is sleeping, must be awakened. Yeah, it gets kind of humorous, him having that much faith in God and just taunting the evil people there. And it got so bad that they cried louder, cut themselves with knives and lances till the blood gushed out of them, and it was midday was past. They prophesied till the offering of the evening sacrifice. I'm going to skip ahead. Elijah prepared the altar, put the bull on the altar, and he says, now he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 seah of seeds, which I have no idea what that is. But he put the wood in order and put the bull in pieces, laid it on the wood, and he put like a trench, like a moat around the sacrifice. And he said, fill 4 water pots with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood. Then he said, do it a second time. They did it a second time. He said, do it a third time, and they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. And all he did was he just prayed 63 words, and the fire of God from heaven fell on the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dust. It licked up the water that was in the trench, and all the people fell on their faces. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And that was Elijah put his faith in God, and God came through. But see, we don't. We have little faith, but he had big faith. He says, I know God can do this. Let's do something fun. Let's just build a whole trench here. We'll just fill it with water and, 4 buckets full and more. And I mean, everything was just sopping wet. And he had faith in God. He stood and believed that God could do it, and God came through. And he stood in the face of opposition, and God delivered him. And it's quite a good story. But it was, it's good for us to exercise our faith and to trust in God, because he will come through. Esther is another good example of a woman whose faith made her courageous. She was in constant danger, not because of what she was doing, but simply because of who she was, a Jew. At a politically tumultuous time, Esther navigated tricky waters well and delivered the Israelites from an evil man's bitter vendetta. It took courage to stay. Okay, the story in Esther chapter 7, the king's wife did something, didn't obey him, and he put his wife away from him and said, find me another wife. Well, out of all the women that they found, Esther was the prettiest, the most fairest, and he chose her for a wife, but she was a Jew. But she kind of kept that to herself. Now, Haman was was the king's right hand man, and what he did was he wanted to kill all the Jews because he hated, of all things, Mordecai, which happened to be Esther's uncle, and he wouldn't bow his knee whenever Haman came around, and that ticked Haman off. And so Haman tried to devise a means of getting rid of all the Jews because his pride was hurt. And what it boils down to this is that she went in to see the king. And now, mind you, you can't go into the court if you're not invited. And if you go into the court where the king was and he didn't like it, he could kill you on the spot. And Mordecai told Esther, he says, who knows, you was raised up for this very purpose, raised up for such a time as this to stand up for the people. So she said, everybody fast, and if I die, I die. I'm going to stand on faith in God, and I'm going to go into that court because it was a serious thing to interrupt the king in the court. And so she entered into the court, and the king held out his staff to her and told her to come forward, and she had a meal. Long story short, she saved the Israelites from certain destruction, and Haman was executed, and God came through. But she stood faith in a really bad time, and God came through. Third thing is, faith in God provides stability. Have you ever met someone who seemed unshakable? The coworker who takes a deep breath when a computer crashes instead of slamming her or his head on the desk? The mom who manages to keep her kids calm, keep her kids calm. Last minute requests pile up. You know, we all want to persevere through a day without having a meltdown or throwing a tantrum, despite how we feel at times. Faith in God is what allows us to experience stability in the midst of instability. When life feels out of control, we take comfort in knowing that God is in control. And that's something that gives us stability from day to day. That's why I was telling you with my sister that life-changing moment will give her a stability to trust in God from this day forward, a real trust and a real unshakable, unmoving security, knowing that God is going to be there every time. In the Bible, Daniel's life provides several examples of stability in the face of instability. Daniel and many other Israelites were kidnapped and forced to join the Babylonian king's service. This meant new clothes, new food, new language, new customs, new everything. But even though Daniel was a hostage, he stayed true to what he knew about God. He wouldn't eat the things that God told the Israelites not to eat, and God actually blessed him for it. Daniel was a man that kept God's truth, and he would not budge. You know, the king's food was food that was sacrificed to idols and was given to, and usually the stuff sacrificed to idols was the choicest food. So it was good stuff, but it was sacrificed to idols, and God says, you're not to eat this stuff. And so Daniel took a stand and said, I will not eat of this food because God says it's wrong. I tell you what, you give us, and they had wine to go with their food. And he says, tell you what, you give us water to drink and let me eat vegetables. And there was three of them. There was Daniel and his three friends. And he says, if the king finds out that you look sickly, he said, he will take my head off of me. He says, well, let's just try it for 3 or 4 days. And so they did that, and God honored Daniel for standing up to his word. And Daniel and his three friends looked better, looked fattier, looked more healthy than all the other kids that they had taken to Babylon. And so it was neat that God honored him in that area. And Daniel was eventually promoted into the king's royal court, where some people didn't like his worship of God instead of the king. Government officials tried to pin something on Daniel, but they could not find no corruption in him. I'm talking, like, if I remember right, it was something like 250 other people that was in the royal court along with him, and they all looked at his life to try to find something wrong, and they couldn't. Because he was trustworthy and he was neither corrupt nor negligent. In Daniel 6:4, they plotted against him, but Daniel stayed true to God just as he had done before. And they said anybody that doesn't worship the king will be thrown in the lion's den. And the whole thing was they kind of twisted around, saying anybody that praised anybody other than you, O king, must be thrown in the lion's den. And the king signed it, and it became law. And that's how they got Daniel, because Daniel still prayed 3 times a day facing the east towards Jerusalem. And when he didn't budge when they offered a decree and he knew that it was law, he still went up to his room and prayed. And they caught him and threw him in the lion's den. And the king was really sorrowful because he really liked Daniel a lot. And the next day, the king, he couldn't sleep all night. And so he got up, went in the morning, he says, "Oh, Daniel, is the God you serve able to protect you?" And he said, "Yes, king, I'm still alive, and the lions didn't harm me at all." So they ended up pulling Daniel out and throwing the 250 men and their families into the lion's den. And before they even hit the floor, the lions had mastered over them. And that's how, but Daniel, by faith, stood his ground, and God delivered. Faith can do a lot of things in your life if you let it. It will grow you and allow you to do things you never thought you're capable of. It'll turn you into a dreamer who really believes that with God all things are possible, Matthew 19:26. And it was just like when I pastored a church. I filled in for somebody. Gene Pope was filling in because they didn't have a pastor. He couldn't do it for a couple of weeks, or couldn't do it, and so he asked me if I would. Man, I tell you, I was scared to death. And so I thought, yeah, I'll do it. So I went in, and I did it the best I could, and it was like, when was that? It was something like in November or something. And then by January, they said, "Well, we want to keep you on as pastor." Now, in my mind, I thought, how in the world am I going to come up with 52 different sermons a year? That just blew me away, because I thought, okay, and then I thought, well, Lord, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm going to lean and trust in you. I can't do this. I mean, this is overwhelming. And so, but God helped me, and I did. I was there 10 years and never preached the same sermon twice. That's how good God is when we put our faith in Him. And God helped the church to go from 9 people up to like 35, and people, their faith was really their personal walk with God was strengthened. And it wasn't because of anything I did, but it was just whatever God impressed on my mind to do. That's what I did, and went from almost like a dead church to being somewhat of a live church again. And that's all praise to God. But that was a pretty scary moment to be in charge of something like that. And but God pulled through. I mean, He pulled through, and that's why anything else comes up, I'm not afraid to tackle it, because of that past experience. Build my faith, and I trusted Him when I couldn't see any evidence, any physical evidence of anything, and God pulled through. And faith will always pull us through. And God will never disappoint us. He's always there for us, to take care of us, to watch over us, to give us an inner strength. You know, it even says in Psalms 23, and I go back to Psalms 23 because I just love that chapter. It talks of how well God takes care of us. And it says, yea, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because you are with me. And God, even in our worst moments, God will always, always be there with us. And that's worth putting our faith in. You know, it's just amazing what God is capable of doing if we just, you know, God, I believe you to do this. And be like Elijah. Have strong faith and put water on it and say, God, light it up. You know, that's really strong faith. And so that's, but he really pleased God in him putting his faith in him. It was a good thing. Well, that